future feels so unsure. Didn't we deserve more? The burden that you left is way too heavy for me. Do you ever feel like the world would die out? My anxieties off the roof, I cry out. We have gone too far, take me back right now. I see fire burning, but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground, but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning, but I'm fine. You're nobody. Children used to run and play. Look at all the mess we made. Guess I never know where it went wrong. Sometimes I feel like all that's said, 'cause I wrote and people forget. In this crazy world I don't belong. I see fire burning, but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground, but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning, but I'm fine. No, you're nobody. The future feels so unsure. Didn't we deserve more? The burden that you left is way too heavy for me. Do you ever feel like the world would die out? My anxieties off the roof, I cry out. We have gone too far, take me back right now. I see fire burning, but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground, but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning, but I'm fine. You're nobody. Children used to run and play. the mess we made. Guess I'll never know where it went wrong. Sometimes I feel like all that's said, 'cause we're all them people forget. In this crazy world I don't belong. I see fire burning but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning but I'm fine. I am nobody. Feels so unsure. Didn't we deserve more? The burden that you left is way too heavy for me. Do you ever feel like the world would die out? My anxieties off the roof, I cry out. We have gone too far, take me back right now. I see fire burning but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning but I'm fine. I am nobody. Children used to run and play. Look at all the mess we made. Guess I'll never know where it went wrong. Sometimes I feel like all that's said, 'cause we're all them people forget. In this crazy world I don't belong. I see fire burning but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning but I'm fine. I am nobody. future feels so unsure. Didn't we deserve more? The burden that you left is way too heavy for me. Do you ever feel like the world would die out? My anxiety's off the roof, I cry out. We have gone too far, take me back right now. I see fire burning, but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny. Children used to run and play. Look at all the mess we made. Guess I never know where it went wrong. Sometimes I feel like all that's sad, 'cause why all them people forget? In this crazy world I don't belong. I see fire burning, but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground, but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning, but I'm fine. No, I'm nobody. The future feels so unsure. Didn't we deserve more? The burden that you left is way too heavy for me. Do you ever feel like the world would die out? My anxiety's off the roof, I cry out. We have gone too far, take me back right now. I see fire burning, but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground, but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning, but I'm fine. I'm nobody.
Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It is very exciting for us to finally have our third and final episode for the year for our Dee Hati Diaries webinar series. In our last episode, we talked about grief in the context of our local cultures and religions, specifically as a Muslim. And to continue on that narrative, today, in conjunction with All Souls Day, we will be focusing on the perspective of Christians. So for those who are wondering, Dee Hati Center for Grief, Bereavement and Trauma is a center that aims to be holistic in nature, whereby we not only focus on the psychological and physical aspect of grief, but also from the spiritual and cultural side of it. As a country filled with an abundance of different races, culture and religion, we each have our own ways of coping with grief through different rituals and methods. Hence, this topic is just as important to touch in our local context. So in this episode, we are privileged to have two distinguished experts with us. The first is Reverend Father Galvin Richard Ngumbang, who was a priest for the Catholic Archdiocese of Kuching in 2017 and now serving at the Parochial Vicar at the Cathedral Parish of St. Joseph's, Kuching. He is actively involved in administration, liturgical celebrations, and pastoral care, as well as in the faith formation in the parish. Our second expert is Hazel, who is a clinical psychologist who spearheaded the establishment of the Clinical Psychology Department at Hospital Sentosa in 2018. She is experienced in providing therapy, conducting psychological assessments, talks, and workshops for individuals and families of diverse backgrounds and ages, and is also an advocate and strong believer of community resilience, and is currently pursuing her PhD with UNIMAS. Thank you very much for agreeing to joining us tonight, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So before we start, I'd like to point out to our listeners first that if you have any questions during our webinar, feel free to type it out in our comments section, and we will try our best to answer at the end of the session if we have enough time. But if we are not able to address the questions, we will do it outside of the webinar. So to start, in Sarawak alone, Christianity makes up over 50% of our population, if believe it or not, which makes this topic very, very important to our listeners. Whether you are of the same faith or not, it does not hurt to learn more about our fellow neighbors. So as a start, let us dive into the history of grief from a Christian's perspective, as well as insights into how grief has been understood and addressed throughout the history of Christianity. Are there any notable historical events, biblical passages, or figures that have shaped a Christian's perspective on grief? Perhaps we can invite Reverend Galvin to share his thoughts and knowledge on this.
Thank you, Naz. Good evening, everyone. Generally, when we look into the Bible, another way of looking at the Bible is actually it is a faith reflection, finding meaning in all situations of life, in goodness, in bad situations, to ask ourselves, where is God? And all throughout the Bible, we have this existence of God, the presence of God in all situations, even in those, like King David, when he is, in sin, when he was very sorry and repented of his sinfulness, he sang to God, he reached out to God. So it is natural to find God in all situations of life, especially in death and in grieving our departed loved ones. The biblical foundation for Christian hope, especially in grieving, in death, is this: the suffering, the death, and the resurrection of Christ, which happened 2,000 years ago, as we hear in all the Gospels, all the four Gospels. Therefore, our faith tells us this, that Jesus died and rose again to redeem us from eternal damnation, so that we can not only experience, but importantly, so that we can have eternal life. This is what our faith tells us. A sidetrack, it is interesting to note that throughout history, some people tried to deny the divinity of Jesus, all these kind of issues, but no one has ever denied the resurrection of Jesus. It is even recorded by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus in the 1st century record of the Jewish antiquities. So the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the basis of this faith, of this hope, especially for those who are facing grief, to find meaning in the deep loss of their departed loved ones. Now, in the Catholic Church, we acknowledge the suffering and death as part of human existence. And therefore, we prepare our faithful to face this reality through the sacraments and also through the church teachings and liturgical celebration. For example, the anointing of the sick is a sacrament given not only to pray for physical healing, but also emotional and spiritual healing. This sacrament is also given to those who are facing the danger of death, to assist them in their last moment, assuring them that they are not alone, that the whole church is praying for them, but more importantly, with them also. There are also specific prayers for the pastoral care for the dying, as well as for the family members who are grieving, that the church through her priests can offer. So the priests are there to minister all these sacraments, to be ever present, to assure the people of God that they are not alone. In the Christian tradition, dying and death is a sacred time. It is the passing over from this temporary home into our eternal abode in heaven. And that is why in the Catholic tradition, we have vigils, or in what we commonly call it as funeral wake prayers, after the passing of our loved ones. We have funeral masses. We have requiem masses, especially celebrated on the All Souls Day, to pray for the departed loved ones. This is how we have been, supporting people who are losing their loved ones through faith. And not only that, all these prayers and availability of the priests, of the ministers of the church, will help the grieving family to find hope, to find meaning and consolation in this time of grief. And Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, taken from the Beatitudes, the teaching of Jesus from the Mount, assures us, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." So this is really the gist of the Christian tradition, looking into death as well as grieving as part of human existence.
Oh, that is beautiful. I really like that statement when you said that there's finding meaning in all of the loss, because that is something that even in our current modern day, that I guess you can say people only just discovered. For example, like David Kessler, who is a very prominent grief expert. He wrote a book about the 6th stage of loss of grief. Sorry, which is finding meaning. Yet it was already been documented, already been talked about all the way back in ancient times in early Christianity. So people, you can see that there's that relation between, I guess, modern psychology and in the psycho-spiritual part. It kind of, I like the beauty of the fact that it links, and we can still look back at the spiritual side to be able to find meaning in our loss. So we recognize that grief is, as you mentioned before, it's a universal experience that transcends cultural and religious boundaries. It's an emotional journey that all of us will embark at some point in our lives, and it is a journey that can both profoundly be challenging and deeply transformative. So for those who find solace and guidance in their Christian faith, the path through grief often intertwines with the support offered by the Christian community and the church. So in these times of profound loss, these faith-based foundations can be pillars of strength and sources of solace. Hazel, so from your experience and perspective, we'd love to hear your insight on this. In what ways do Christian community and the church traditionally provide support to individuals who are grieving, and how can they create an environment that truly nurtures and uplifts those facing loss?
Right. Nazwan, before I kind of dive into that, I would like to kind of echo what Reverend was mentioning earlier about how, death and loss is really part of that journey. Like, we are all pilgrims in a journey of life, right? So part of journey of life is really going through death and losses. And I particularly remember, when this whole episode came about, when they ask about, when the question of how Christians, from Christian perspective, how do we grieve losses and death? I particularly remember how Jesus reacted when he saw when Lazarus died, right, Reverend? So like when Lazarus died, Jesus actually wept, and I felt that it is a very prominent moment, because Jesus to us is God. He's fully God and fully man at the same time. So he went through the experiences of human 100%. So he went through grief and all that as well. And the beautiful thing for me is that he very clearly showed in the Bible and in the stories of when he was dealing with the death of Lazarus, is that it's okay to mourn, it's okay to cry, it's okay to really just grieve and go through that, that whole journey of experiencing the pain of losing someone that you love. So for me, I felt that there's so much beauty in that, because when Jesus does it, right, and us as Christian, we look up to Jesus as our role model. He's our God. It gives so much more meaning, because I feel that it allows a lot more liberty and freedom to really go through grief as Christians, which brings me to, you know, that whole community support as church and Christians. I'm a big believer of community resilience, as mentioned earlier. You know, when Nazwan, you were reading my bio, I believe that apart from building our own personal resilience, community plays a big part in the works of resilience as a person. The entire system can play a role to strengthen an individual and family and so forth. You know, so it's a vice versa thing. And when it comes to grieving a death, church and community definitely has a big part to help in the grief process. And I think our ancestors were very aware of the power of community, which is why, if we notice in many different cultures, the funeral procession does exist, right? Different cultures across different, different religions or different races, we all have our own ways of grieving, and it's usually there's a communal gathering in these funeral processions. The rituals are often one that brings family and friends together. Yes, it's for a last send-off, but it's also a time where people come together to support one another. That is why when MCO and COVID hit, grieving the death becomes a lot more complicated and becomes a lot more lonelier and harder, because there's no funeral, there's no communal grieving, and the person who experienced that loss may find it harder to go through that grief process. What I think church and community does well is the presence in the wake services and the funerals, the volunteering of helping the services itself, you know, the ministers who get everything ironed out and done so that the family members do not have to worry. And what the church and community can be more mindful of is not to let the support end in the funeral itself, but go beyond the funeral. Truthfully, many family members who are running the funeral never really actually experience the actual, or never really get to really grieve until after everything ends, right? They were so busy ironing out everything. So what church and community can do is extend the support further, keep checking in and making sure like the basic things, like these people who are grieving, they're healthy, they're eating their food, you know, they're taking their bath, they're not forgetting to, you know, take care of themselves. In these times, those who are grieving would really need a little more support, perhaps even in doing the very basic. Or a listening ear, perhaps, you know, to go through all the different stages of grief, the anger, the regrets, and all that. There is no need for solutions, really, you know, no need to say anything positive, no need to try to get them to be positive and whatnot. As mentioned earlier, it's a time of mourning and grieving. So allow them that space, holding that space just for people to allow themselves to be human. And I think that's good enough. Of course, if they begin to show more signs that are more concerning, for example, they may have a critical mental health issues, or they are beginning to, you know, hurt themselves or others, then I think, yes, it's important to also bring them to support and seek professional help as well. I think one of the stories in the Bible that is very prominent for me is Job. And Job has 3 friends who are very helpful during that, when Job was really angry, you know, he was grieving and all that. And then these 3 friends were giving a lot of advice, you know, talking about, you know, how maybe you have done this wrong, maybe you've done that wrong, and a lot of different comments that they were giving Job. And I remember towards the end, God actually told these 3 people to repent and ask Job to pray for them instead. So I feel that it's important to remind ourselves not to be like these 3 friends. You know, sometimes when I think they started well. You know, so these 3 friends actually sat with Job for 7 days, not saying anything, but eventually they begin to speak. So I felt sometimes when we don't know what to say, it's important to just sit and not say anything. You know, your presence sometimes will mean more than the words you say. You can offer prayer, but you do not need to comment about anything that is not helpful at that period of time. So that's my take on the community's support. But I also think that it's a little bit more easier to detect and know when to go all out to support a grief that involves the death of a loved one. I think what is harder for the church community to support is when there are different types of grief, like loss of pet, or a divorce, or breakup, estrangement from family, loss of job, trauma, and all that. So I feel that churches and communities can do a little bit more support in that area, where do not just dismiss this, oh, there's nobody, dead, so it's fine. But really to understand that different kinds of losses does evoke different kinds of grief responses as well. And we talk about, people who experience, people who are lost to, loss that are disenfranchised, loss that are never really accounted for, like MH 370, right? There's no body. We don't know where are they. And these kind of losses need grieving as well. And if the church community will come together and support the person experiencing this, it will be really powerful as well. So I think what church and community needs to realize is that there are a lot of different types of grief, and different types of grief poses different kinds, different ways of grieving. I'm not suggesting that everyone should be an expert in, dealing with all this grief subject matter, but perhaps an awareness of how complicated and different grief can look like to different people, and how allowing those differences to take place without judgment, supporting them through as their grief is very important, because the only way to get through grief is to grieve. Again, the boundaries, as long as they're not a harm to themselves or others. So that's my take.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing, Hazel. When you mentioned that the different type of grief, there's so many things like I want to share as well on that. Like there's a lot of like stigma that comes with it as well, especially like for example, if someone lost a loved one tragically, perhaps like through suicide, people have no idea what to say, no idea what to do. Sometimes they give the wrong advice. They have good intentions. People always have good intentions that they want to help. I think that is something that all of us can agree on, that they want to help, but sometimes the way they help is not the same, not the right way. Perhaps that is similar to the story that you mentioned. Sorry, is it Jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, there's good intentions, but they're not doing it the right way, and this is something I feel like the community can learn. As we as a community should I guess to say put some effort into finding out how to support each other in grief, right?
Yeah. Sorry, can I add in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the difficulty for community is the fact that when you sit down and do nothing, it is a very vulnerable process. So when you are sitting with somebody else's pain and you're watching that person, that I'm sure that you care about this person as well. So watching that person go through that pain process, it is difficult. And it's a very vulnerable process because it touches something within yourself as well. So what happens to a lot of us is when we feel vulnerable, we very quickly want to solve it. We want to deal with that discomfort and all that. So, but the truth is, healing process is very vulnerable, and that whole pain of loss process is really very vulnerable and very raw. And to really be able to sit with that discomfort, that takes a lot from that person to be vulnerable as well. So I would say, yes, to learn to hold space, to not react to that discomfort, but at the same time to also know your limits and boundaries, because sometimes when we're supporting someone and we're not very clear of our boundaries, we try very hard to just give all of ourselves, and then we get drained and overwhelmed because that whole grief process is really long and it can be very different. So I feel that sometimes it's learning to, pace yourself and say that, okay, I'm taking a break, get someone else to come in and support. And then I'll take a break and I come back again and I'll support you again when I'm in a better place. So being able to kind of learn that boundary for ourselves is also very important in supporting somebody who is going through a grief process, because it can be very vulnerable, and it's difficult. Our own vulnerability. That's the truth, right? A lot of somebody cries like, "What's wrong? Can we help you? I want to make you feel better." But sometimes it's not really about making them feel better, but to allow them to go through that whole pain process. Very important.
That's true. It's like I guess like a lot of people, they always try to tell you to be strong or don't cry. That is like a common cliche that we commonly hear, and most people think most of the time. Even I myself am guilty of saying things like that. We used to think that it's the correct thing to say, but for the person who is grieving, they don't. Sometimes for some maybe it works, but for the most, it doesn't really feel that way. It feels like you're telling us to suppress that anger because you want us to just hide the sadness, hide the grief, and being repressing of that. Sorry.
In other words, your emotion are making me uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
I think that's where vulnerability is important.
Yeah.
And we are so afraid of being vulnerable that I don't want this silent, I must say something, otherwise I am not comfortable. But instead of saying something which is helpful, it might hurt other people. That is their time to grieve. Allow them to grieve.
Yes.
That is the time for them to cry. Allow them to cry. And as friends, as the support system of that person, all we need to do is just to be present. What I usually do is, just to touch them, their hands, or to hug them and look into their eyes and say, "Hey, I'm with you." Yeah, just that alone will do. You don't have, sometimes words are not necessary in these times. You cannot, use logic to face grief. Yeah, that's where the heart is, and that's where, your touch, your eye contact is important. Yeah.
Very beautiful.
Yeah. So I want to bring back to in the first question when Reverend was talking about how wake is essential part of how a funeral goes on in a Christian funeral. And what makes it so beautiful is that the fact that many different races and religions have something similar in that sense. So the role of faith is like very deeply personal and a spiritual aspect of the grieving process. So Reverend, back to you. As someone who is very deeply attuned in this intersection of faith and grief, we're eager to hear your insights, as in like how particularly within the context of Christianity does faith shape and influence the grieving process, and how can it provide comfort and meaning to those who are grieving?
All right. In the Christian faith, especially in the rite of the Christian funeral, I love this part at the rite of the final commendation. Yeah, before we depart from the church after the mass to the cemetery. There is one part that the prayer says this, that we are assured that one day we shall be reunited with our departed loved ones. So it brings to mind that this separation is temporary. And this is made possible through the resurrection of Christ, who has conquered death himself. And because of this resurrection, St. Paul, in his epistle to the Romans, assures us also that in death, sin has no power over us, that we are assured of this new and eternal life. And eternal life is this, life with God. So for all our departed loved ones, this is our faith that tells us that they are now living with God. And, there will be no more suffering, there will be no sickness, that it is a time for them just to contemplate the goodness of God. Therefore, faith is very important. The element of faith is very important in grief, as it acts as a safety net, to prevent us from falling into the bottomless pit of grief. If without faith we have nothing to cling on, the danger is that we just go down into depression and there is nothing to catch us, to give us that hope. So faith helps us to find meaning again, and to help us to cope with the grief, because with faith we grieve in hope. Yes, it is a process, but we are assured, that one day we will be reunited again. We are assured that our loved ones, they are now perhaps, in a better place, because where there is faith, where there is God, and where there is God, there is peace. So with faith, we will find peace when we find meaning in the passing of our loved ones. Because when we lose our loved ones, there's so many questions. Why it happens, what am I going to do? No one can answer this question, perhaps. Only time will tell us when it is ready to be answered. So that is where faith will be that pillar to strengthen us, in times of grief, to find hope, to find meaning in our grief. So it is very important for us to really, cling on to the faith, especially in losing our loved ones. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. I think what I love the most about what you just said earlier was that how faith is like a safety net, and I can relate with that so much. Even though we have different faith, but during in my time of loss, faith was for me was my safety net as well, and it really helped to pull me out of my own sadness and grief. Without that faith, I may not have been able to, I guess you can say, be able to bounce back as quickly or as easily as others. So I guess to get back to onto the next topic. So we'll be continuing on to the topic on the cultural aspect. Sometimes we tend to bring in like our own culture into the grieving rituals. So for example, myself in the Muslim community in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, some families organize like tahlil on the 3rd, 7th, 40th, and 100th day of the funeral, after the funeral. So this tahlil, they comprises of like a recitation of prayers and supplications for the deceased, and it's a form of communal grieving. This ritual is like commonly found in our region, but differs in other regions. So in our local context, perhaps Hazel could shed some light on this. From a Christian context, has culture played a role in the grieving rituals in a Christian family in Malaysia? Perhaps even from a racial point of view as well, if you want to touch on that.
I think that the culture does play a role in the different rituals that we do, even in Christian, as Christians. I'm not very sure about the different, like for example, Chinese or Ibans and all that. What are the specific differences in their culture that they do? But like for example, in Christian, they have this in the funeral processions, the one that I attend, I'm Protestant Christian, so the funeral procession is usually there's like a wake service where you go through praise and worship, and then you have a time of eulogy where you share different things, different memories you have about the deceased. So for me, some of these practices is in itself a very healing process for the people grieving. So it's also considered a ritual. You can have, you cannot have it too. Some people will do eulogy very differently. Some people do a memorialization where they do tree plantings and whatnot. So I personally feel that whatever rituals there are, as long as it helps that person to grieve and it helps that person to memorialize that the deceased in a way that is healing for them, why not? So I personally think, like what Reverend mentioned earlier, the beautiful thing about someone grieving as Christians, and I think as Muslim as well, is the hope that comes with the grieving, the hope that, is not the end for us all. We will still see each other again in heaven, we'll see each other again in paradise, but there's no longer suffering. The hope that, my God is with me through these tough moments. I'm not alone. He sits with me, he weeps with me, he will pull me through the toughest moment, and I can still depend on him, even in all my heartbrokenness, and I can look to him for comfort. So I think that in itself, in a Christian perspective, is something that in the faith and in the religion factor would be helpful in the healing process of grieving as well. The element of hope is very powerful. It injects lights where there's a lot of darkness. So apart from, so there's a lot of different culture. Of course, like for me, I also know of some Chinese culture, but it is of different religions. So we're not going to talk about it here because this is a bit more Christian. But like different religions, they have certain rituals that help them to, help them to find peace in making sure that the person who's deceased is in a better place. So they do different rituals to make sure that this person goes to a better place as well. So whatever the ritual is, it helps that person to grieve, helps the person to feel better as a living person, to have done something for the person who has passed on. Or maybe, just simple rituals like fulfilling certain wishes that this person wished to have, fulfilling certain things that this person has instructed to fulfill. This ritual in itself is also grief, and is also helping the person living to get through the very tough process of grieving, as well as to, in a way, seek healing for themselves. So my point is that in this Christian perspective, there's a lot of hope, and the hope is what makes the grieving less gloomy. And same with therapy, I always feel that as a therapist, yes, we are here in a quest to help someone to find themselves, to find a root cause of problem. But the main thing for people to come to therapy is the hope of healing. Otherwise, why do you keep coming, right? The sense of hope is something that will be a good catalyst for healing to happen. And similarly, in grieving, hope is what makes grieving a little bit less gloomy, as I mentioned, because we believe in this all-understanding and all-loving God. We can also fully allow ourselves to be real with God, to be angry like Job, right? To have these different moments. As a Christian, when I read the story of Job, I felt really liberated, because he can be angry at God, and God didn't just send thunder and lightning to, right? So he can be angry, and God is perfectly fine with this grieving process. The variations in different denominations is what helps these different people to grieve differently and to find their own peace and find solace with God, as well as with the disease, the death that has happened. So I feel that the most important thing in Christian, whatever rituals they have, they always have this acknowledgement of a higher power, God as a person in control, when things feels like out of control. And that is what would help them to kind of go through the entire grief process a little bit more hopeful and a little bit more less spiraling down to that whole dark holes and whatnot. Overall, I think each of us may have different rituals, whether or not it's related to culture or religion. I think it's perfectly fine to have your own ritualization to process the loss. Like I can share a personal story that I went through. I'm a therapist, and I think 2 or 3 years ago, I have lost a patient to completed suicide. And it was a very confusing moment for me. At the same time, I only met this patient about 2 to 3 times. So we did a lot of post-mortem, like we have this discussion and all that. And finally, we realized, okay, everything that needs to be done has been done, and it happened. So then now I am processing my grief. Like I am not very clear what was happening within me, because from Monday to Friday, I'm working very well. I still work, I still go to work, I still see my clients and all that. But on Saturday and Sunday, I start to cry, and I will write, what do you call that? I will write
the journal,
tributes and all to this person that I only met about 2 to 3 times. And I was wondering what was going on. And then I remember I spoke to my supervisor. Is our sifu, like in our field we have our own sifus. So I spoke to my supervisor, which she has also passed on last year due to breast cancer as well. And I owe it to her, because grief and all is really something that she has brought me to really experience, as a therapist, as a person, and she has gone through with me a lot of grieving process. So this is one of the grieving process that she went through with me. And I remember it was a supervision where a group of us, different therapists, all under her, were having this discussion. So everyone was trying to find out, what was going on with me. Are you feeling guilt? Are you feeling this? So a lot of different kind of inputs were coming in. And I wasn't feeling, I said, maybe this, maybe that, but I don't really feel connected to those different hypotheses that were that was posed to me. And one powerful thing that she said to me was that, Hazel, all of us can tell you what is in our head, what is going on, what are you feeling? All of us can tell you what's in our head. But what you feel is very hard. It's in your heart. Nobody can really tell you what is going on. This is your grief process. If you need to grieve Saturday and Sunday to cry out, because Monday and Friday you have to work, right? But Saturday, Sunday, this is your ritual, your grief process that you need to go through. Why not? Just go ahead. Do it. No, we don't need an answer to why are we grieving for this person if you're not in guilt, if you're not angry, if you're not, all that. Why do we need that reason? Sometimes the heart needs to grieve, so the heart will grieve. So she told me this, and it liberated me so much. And I allow myself that whole process, without questioning why. So sometimes the question comes from ourselves, right? So without that question, to really just allow myself to go through that process, to grieve and whatnot. And it really helped me to understand and embrace grief in a very, very different manner. And I feel that a lot of times we try very hard to rationalize, is this right? Is this wrong? Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing that? But if that ritual is not harming anyone, it's not harming yourself, it's not harming others, and this ritual is helping you to heal, go ahead, and do it, whatever it may mean. That's my take. Maybe, Reverend, you have your additional points as well.
Thank you. I think the element of community and also the church plays a very important role in the grieving process. I remember when I lost my father when I was 16 years old, that community in our housing area, they would come the moment they heard the news, everyone came. And for me, as a 16-year-old boy at that time, I was like, wow, this is really happening. And they will be there cooking, they will be there, to make sure that everything is fine. I think that is very important. And in the church also, what is important for me is also, before you close the casket for the last time, to allow the family members to have that moment to, have that final goodbye, that personal time. I think that is the most important thing, that closure, to allow them to have that private moment, to say whatever they need to say, to say goodbye and whatnot, to see for the last time. I think that's where the church, the community play a very important role. in the grieving process. And that is why also the rites in the church helps us to, to affirm our faith in, number one, the resurrection. Number two, that, one day we'll be reunited again. So faith, community, be it social or faith, a related community, immense impact in helping family or individuals to grieve.
That's a beautiful. Thank you very much, Hazel and Reverend, for sharing that. I like the point when you mentioned that the family and the community should be there during the funeral rites to say their last goodbye, and that is very, very important for them to seek that closure, like you said, to finally, I guess you can say, get over the stage of denial, to see that yes, this has happened.
It's really happening.
Yes, it is really happening, and we saw the consequences of not going to the funerals during the COVID-19 pandemic, when every single funeral, every single death, you're not there. There's no community gathering, there's no funeral, there's no nothing. You only see it from the pictures. You're not really sure, did this really happen? Did they really pass away? Did my father really die? And it made the grieving process so much more difficult. And that's why I would say there's quite a spike in I guess you could say mental health problems during that time. And you see it that just strengthens so much more why we as a community should get together to be able to help one another, especially during this time. So coming to the tail end of our episode, is already 9:15. We can wrap up before we get on to the questions. Let us have a question for both Hazel and Reverend, for those who are going through grief and supporting someone who is in grief. What advice do you have for them? Perhaps Hazel first.
Perhaps I'll just kind of like conclude a little bit of what I said and then go to here. So basically, whatever rituals that we go through, as Christians, there's always this basis of hope. So I think whatever ritual, it doesn't matter, but the most important is to grieve with hope, and which is what I am ending with, that we grieve, but remember the assurance of your faith. Grieve, but not without hope. I think in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says, brothers and sisters, we do not want to be ignorant about those who fall asleep or to grieve like the rest of humanity who have no hope. So for Christians, we have hope that our God is always with us. We have hope that one day we will see our loved ones again in heaven. So I think when we grieve, always remember to grieve with hope. And to the person grieving and supporting, grief comes in many forms, many ways, however length. As long as it's not harmful to self or others, do what helps you process it, whatever rituals. The only way to cure grief is to grieve. So befriend your pain of loss as opposed to finding solution. That this is the only right way to do it. A lot of healing is in owning your pain. Owning your pain can empower and transform us, and enables us to turn the pain into gain. So if you need to regret, you need to cry, you need to be angry when you lose something, yes, go ahead. All kinds of losses, not just loss through death. So the question would be, how can we tame our fear and trust that we will be okay, even as we turn inward to face our losses? Trust that it is okay to be vulnerable and be out of control, because there is so much strength within and from faith and the community that we can draw from. So to trust that you can go through this grief because you have a community, you have a God, you have hope, that these are all strengths that you can draw from. Take your time and not push yourself or others, if you're helping the person to grieve, through the process. I also end with the quote by Anne Lamott. Anne Lamott says, "You will lose someone you can't live without, and your heart will be badly broken. And the bad news is that you never completely get over your loss of your beloved. But this is also the good news, that they live forever in your broken heart that does not seal back up, and you come true. It's like having a broken leg that never heals perfectly, that still hurts when the weather gets cold. But you learn to dance with the limp." For many, there is no such thing as total closure or moving on, but there is such a thing as quality closure. So find yours, find your quality closure, and remember, behind the pain, a lot of times behind the pain, behind this grieving, is really love, right? We grieve because we love, because if you don't love something, if you don't love someone, losing that means nothing. So we grieve because we love, and it's always better to have loved and lost than never loved before, right? Yeah. So that's my end point. What I would like to say in closing. Yeah.
Thank you, Reverend.
Okay, this still stuck in my head. I remember the late Queen Elizabeth, who said that grief is the price we pay for love. I think the most beautiful quote I can think of for this session tonight.
Mm.
We grieve because we have loved, and we have loved much.
Mm.
And as a human person, it is natural for us to grieve, but let us grieve in faith in the resurrection of Christ. Allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Allow ourselves to befriend that grief, that emotion. And in doing so, let us find God in this grief. And may you find meaning. May you find hope, in this grieving. And to end, I would like to offer this prayer. May the soul of our departed loved ones rest in peace. And may the Lord comfort each and every one of us in our grief and wipe away every tear from our cheek. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you very much, Hazel and Galvin. So now I think we move on to the questions. We have two questions. First is from Mr. Jun Hang Tang. How can I endure the loss of my mental health professional? I really am suffering every day. She just meant so much to me. Right, so I think this is like a loss of a breakup, perhaps. Perhaps maybe Hazel, do you want to take this question?
Sure. I'm not too sure if this mental health professional is because she left or is because by death. But either way, I think just like any other grief, it should not be taken lightly. How do I endure? If you're a Christian, and if this is about Christian perspective, again, we grieve. Allow yourself to grieve all you need, but always remember to always have hope too, because as a Christian, we grieve, but we also have hope in our faith that God will be with us. God will pull us through this very tough moment. But at the same time, as a professional, I feel that it is also not to be taken lightly. I know that when you have a mental health professional, you basically open up your whole life to this person, and you have become so vulnerable. And this therapist or mental health professional is basically like a family to you. So it's like losing a family member. So if you really need someone to really process this through, to talk about it, to go through this very tough moment, do find someone, seek help, seek professional help, or seek anyone who can support you through this very tough moment. I don't think that, even though people say, oh, it's just mental health professional, it's not really your family. It is like a family. I feel that it is important to not just brush it off, But if it's really hurting you and it's really causing you to suffer every day, I really encourage you to find someone to talk about it. And if you need, find a mental health professional to support you through. You also need your community to support you through these tough moments as well. This is what I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hazel. So on to the second question by Mr. Hanif Latif. Hi, panelists. How can friends from different faiths support a Christian friend who is grieving? Is there a pantang larang that we should not do or say? Perhaps, Reverend, you want to take this?
Thank you. There is no hard and fast rule how to accompany a person in grief. It really depends on the person who is grieving. And as a friend, all we can do is to really give ourselves, as I shared just now, just that ministry of presence. You don't have to say a lot of things, to check on that person. Hey, are you okay? Shall we go for a meal? Do activities that, that allows exchange of feelings, to be vulnerable. That is most important. You don't have to really put in any much effort, really. Just to be there and to check on that person, take them out for makan and all that. That is our Malaysian culture. So that's how we become friends. I think, that's from me.
All right. Thank you very much, Reverend. So, and with that, we've reached the end of our webinar. We hope you found today's discussion both informative and inspiring. And it has been an incredible journey of insight and learning. And we are very truly grateful for your participation. So before we part ways, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to our esteemed experts. Your knowledge and insight have been invaluable, and we are so fortunate to have you with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
We also want to say thank you to our audience, and we'd like them to always remember that the learning does not end here. Always try to stay connected with us through our website and social media channels, and also for future webinars. So with that, until we meet again, take care and good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Children used to run and play. Look at all the mess we made. Guess I never know where it went wrong. Sometimes I feel like all that's said, 'cause we're all them people forget. In this crazy world I don't belong. I see fire burning but I close my eyes. I'd rather deny that. Everything is falling out of place. I see trees ripped from the ground, but nobody makes a sound. I see fire burning, but I'm fine. No, you're nobody. No, you're nobody. The future feels so unsure. Didn't we deserve more? The burden that you left is way too heavy for me. Do you ever feel like the world would die out? My anxiety's off the roof, I cry out. We have gone too far, take me back right now.